It's lively, it's unrehearsed, it's moral side of the news, and we welcome you again this weekend. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as always, is a distinguished panel this week. Reverend Harriett Akins-Banman, Centenary United Methodist Church, New Albany. Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition. Rabbi Emerita Gaylia Rooks, the Temple. And Father John Stoltz, St. Aloysius Catholic Church. Our first topic: policing has been a long-running topic of discussion here on this program, and today we're back at it. Louisville Metro Police reports that ranks are down by about 300 officers. That after more than 350 officers retired or resigned since the start of 2020. Many factors contributed to this shortage, including increased scrutiny following the killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, as well as pension issues and a perceived lack of support from Metro government leadership. So turning to our panelists on moral side of the news, what can be done to turn this around and make policing work?
I was reading through the information shared about the story, and it just seems to always be odd that the FOP seems to always be out of sync with the community. The questions they ask are different than the questions asked by the community. Of course, they are a labor union, so their interest is with their employees and their membership. So that probably explains the gap in the expectation level between the two entities. So I remember years ago, I was working with, they had a major crisis in 2003 before the Abrams administration. I was working with a ministerial group that presented a plan to restore peace to the community and trust in the community with the police. And we had a 5-point plan that we did then. It's kind of revisiting the same perennial story that always happens with the police department. I never forget meeting with the mayor, with the assistant mayor at the time. He said, they don't trust us. They're always at odds with us. So don't think that we and the police are on the same page, because they were always going to be at odds with management. They're going to be at odds and many times with the community. So, but the questions they seem to be concerned about: morale, accountability, scrutiny, those things that the community is demanding and concerned about, they are not concerned about. While they're concerned with morale, the community concerned is with being moral. So this is a moral side. So they don't ask the same questions that the community needs to be asking about their performance. And scrutiny, of course, has been a good thing, because with the current federal investigation, they have unearthed a lot of information that was previously hidden by the rank and file of the police department. And none of those issues were ever raised by the FOP. So when it comes to scrutiny is a good thing. Scrutiny increases, accountability increases as well. So so if it's going to mean a shortage in the police department, so be it. And I'm a John, I'm a Mayberryologist. I use Andy and Bernie is the gold standard for policing, and I think that they had a level of accountability and integrity and relationship with the community that was most effective. I think some of those values can be transferred to any police department around the country with great effect and with great benefit, and I'm sure the community will appreciate them as well as were Barney and Andy within the community of Mayberry. So that's my take on it so far.
Two quick things. I'm very interested to know what those 5 points were, Clay, and how do you see those transferring over to this particular time? You said you worked on it in 2003.
Yeah, we did. We presented them, and then the mayor and the city adopted all 5 complete, I might add.
So did that involve trust building between community and police officers and management? It seems like that's where the moral work begins, is to build those bridges of trust that have been so wrecked through horrific events of these past years.
Right. But it was many of it involving accountability, police review, oversight and accountability. Those were some of the major points. I can't recall them all verbatim, but I do recall that was a major component, was the oversight and accountability. That was during the era when Robert White came on board. You may remember Chief White came on board, and it did repair a lot of the breaches within the police department. He did shake things up, but it did restore a lot of the destroyed trust within the community and the police department when those changes were made. And he was going through the police department, demoting, firing, removing officers, and they didn't like that. So nobody likes discipline, but he was exacting discipline and requiring a high standard instead of a low standard, not making excuses for the substandard behavior of the sworn police officer. So the accountability was a major component.
Well, I think that we all want there to be a police force to protect us. I think that we all theoretically, from a moral point of view, agree that police officers put their lives on the line every single day, and they should be paid well for what they do. To me, if we're down on the numbers of police officers, maybe they want to consider a signing bonus. I mean, the raise that they got recently, 6%, I believe it was, that was just to bring them up to the level where they should have been beforehand. So I certainly don't think we're paying them too much money. And, maybe I'm naive. They don't call me gullible Gaylia for nothing. But it seems to me that if we paid our officers better, it would be, we would be able to be more choosy on who we selected for police officers, and officers that were not respectful of the community or showing any signs of discrimination or abuse or, whatever, that it's just, if you have a larger pool, it's easier to pick the better candidates. And money can't solve every problem, not even within the police force. But I do believe that it could help in this situation. I think that the kinds of work, the kinds of things that you were referring to, Clay, that had been done previously, I think that is critical. Some real open lines of communication between the community and management and the officers and the government and all the rest of that. But I'm a big believer that, what do they say? Sunshine is the ultimate disinfectant or whatever.
Well, Ida B. Wells made that term famous, that when you expose the sunshine, then it does have a way of clearing things up and cleansing things in a way that darkness does not. So I agree.
Right. So I think a lot of that is necessary. This is not a simple problem. It's not going to have a simple answer. But I think at the bottom line, a little money in terms of a raise to show our appreciation for the police, and to make it a more competitive job so that we wouldn't have, I'm certainly not saying all the officers we have are scraping the bottom of the barrel, but we would have more from the top of the barrel from which to choose, and more flexibility. And, people maybe would, the dignity that goes along with that could go a long way.
I feel a little bit like I'm on the outside of this very large issue. So some of my thoughts may sound Pollyannish, but I would like our police to have a morale and moral sense, kind of like as our firefighters do.
I like that.
When I see firefighters, I notice the pride that they have in the kind of work that they have. And I'm thinking some police officers actually have that. And it's a pride that maybe we just don't see. And I would certainly want them to see that, but I would want them to have that kind of morale and pride like our firefighters do. They clean the trucks, and they're just very dedicated, even volunteering to go into very dangerous spaces. And I also heartily agree with Gaylia in terms of a good remuneration, a just remuneration for their work. And then I'm also thinking around this, we've had a national conversation that I believe needs to continue on how do we effectively deal with public safety. And law enforcement, I think, is an integral part of that equation. But I also think that there needs to be a practical application of social workers and others to deal with things where the police are getting, it seems to me, all those jobs, which, I would think from day to day, it's not only can be a dangerous occupation, but also can be, I would think, again, I'm on the outside, a miserable occupation in dealing with human faults every day. And I have compassion for that. And I would like to see things better for them, including just pay, and also a very practical way, really not only for the public safety, a sense of public safety, but also for their safety and also for their work, just to help them out to find a practical, good solution of ways of public safety. I'm not so sure that we're there yet, but I certainly would like for that conversation to continue.
John, I agree with you. I was about to make the comparison with the fire department, still recovering from the fire I had last year. I think the reputation of firefighters is impeccable. I mean, everybody loves the firefighters.
Yeah.
So they are a public service, just like
shiny red trucks.
Right, shiny red trucks. They show up to help. You don't hear of concerns about corruption and after hours. I mean, just the firefighter is the gold standard in many respects of public service. And I think that the closer the police department gets to the reputation of a firefighter, the better. So I think that'd be a good place to look. But I like that you did make that comparison with the firefighters, because I think
just to think, it was maybe a long time ago when it was thought of in that way. If you recall, years ago, when people would think of vocations, to think of something heroic, they would say like a firefighter, like a police officer. And again, I think there are police officers who maybe ennoble that, who do. Every once in a while, you'll see on the news them doing some really wonderful things in the community. And so it's there. But the reputation, which is not all theirs issue, maybe some claim of responsibility for that, but a more violent community, a tougher community to police today also makes that, hard. But I would like, we're both thinking the same thing, that I have a sense of that as for the public to think of that as a heroic profession.
Well, there's nothing heroic about standing on the neck of someone or choking them or targeting, driving while black, I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think, again, that we need to be more selective in who has this kind of authority, who has this kind of power, because there is tremendous power behind the badge. And then on the other hand, you promise them a pension and then you take it away. And I mean, there's a lot of understandable grievances from the police department, from all being lumped into the same category when there are honorable, moral, upright, heroic police officers. So it's not a small task, but it is a moral task.
I think I'm on the opposite side of this firefighter police officer comparison, in that I believe they're both important public servants. I'm so grateful to have those who feel that calling to go into those hard lines of work. But when I think of the firefighter, I think of this very well-oiled machine. It is not one firefighter. It is a gaggle. It is a group that comes. It is a team, and everybody knows their points of work, right? And they make it happen. When I think about the work of the police officer, I can see how it could become a bit overwhelming in these days, and that it's one person in a car going to hard situations, as someone mentioned earlier, just seeing the bad decisions humans tend to make for themselves, and those dangerous situations they put others in. So it would be demoralizing after a while and exhausting, and an opportunity to allow hubris to take over, where the power plays would come in, and unfortunately wrong decisions be made by those who are wearing the badge. So I don't know that it's exactly the same, but I do agree that it would be great to have them both held at that same standard and that same level of respect? And how could we do that as a society so that we're not retelling the story every 6 months, but there is a consistency that is found that works. And when new administration comes in, it's not turned upside down again. It is how we're going to play the game.
Well, you mentioned the game. I agree with you, everything you said, Harriett, there. But with, unlike the police department, the fire department, the police department, there's a high tolerance for corruption. Mm-hmm. Corruption is tolerated. When you see a fellow officer involved in, just look at what's going on now. It's in the news as we speak. The federal investigation is wrapping up, and they're unearthing a lot of information about the Brown and Taylor case, for example, where they actually lied on the warrant, lied on the police report. And if you recall, that police report they prepared didn't even have it filled in properly. Just extremely low minimum levels of just rudimentary performance issues that are tolerated by management. Management was aware of what took place, and they were covering up and lying. So when there's a high tolerance for corruption, then you've got a real problem there. So the standard has to always be high. You can't expect less from a police officer than you expect from the general public. It should be much higher. So the standard should be higher and not lower. So when there's a high tolerance for corruption within the rank and file and management, then that's a real problem. So they need to correct that and then get that back on track. And then all from the top to the bottom was complicit with the mayor, from the police chief on down. They were, seemed to be looking the other way and not really being willing to make tough decisions, like with Conrad and so forth, who continued to not have his body cam on when they showed up at the scene for David McAtee, just things like that. So the standard needs to be high, and the FOP needs to be on board with that high standard of conduct and morality. The issue of morality, we can get to the bottom of the issue of morale. I think they two go hand in hand.
All right, panel, we're about halfway through already this edition of Moral Side of the News. So let's move on to our second topic. The U.S. has pledged more money to Ukraine to fight the Russian invasion. Meantime, Russia is teaming with North Korea and China, with U.S. intelligence suggesting they are purchasing rockets and artillery shells from North Korea. So turning back to you, panel, your reactions to these latest developments in Ukraine.
Oh, the whole thing it's so tragic. It's so... I thought with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there we go, gullible Gaylia again, that it was going to be a live and let live, and, everyone would be good neighbors. But the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is just, it's just phenomenal to me that Putin would decide to do that. I think, well, I'm glad to see that Europe is standing behind Ukraine. It's certainly hitting them a lot harder than it is us in terms of energy and things like that. The war crimes against some of the smaller cities and villages and towns in Ukraine that have been documented just break my heart. And it seems like we're dividing the world again, kind of like during World War II. You've got the Allies and the Axis powers. You've got Russia. Of course, they were part of the Allies then, but in the new map, you've got Russia and China, North Korea. I think Syria has been sending missiles, and when you have bad actors banding together, it's scary. And the nuclear threat, whether it's from a nuclear device intentionally detonated or from just, oops, we dropped a bomb on a power plant, a nuclear reactor power plant. I just do not see a good ending to this at all.
I think it's exposing the weakness of Russia. Russia is by far the most colossal landmass of a country on earth. But in many respects, it's one of the weakest. In terms of world economy, it's down like 70th economy of the world. It's real microscopic. It's grossly out of proportion the economy is grossly out of proportion with its size and with the power that it wields in the geopolitics of the world. And then the fact that they're engaged in this war this long with Ukraine, also, in my opinion, expose how weak Russia is. They didn't crush them within a week or a month the way you would think they would have. So the fact that they're having such a hard time subduing Ukraine is evidence of how weak they are. As I remember growing up in a neighborhood, sometime a bully thinks he can go in and jump on a little kid. But when that kid gives him more fight than he bargained for, and I've had that happen to me, then the kid wins because he's engaged in the fight longer than the bully expected him to. So the fact that Russia has to reach out to get help to fight against Ukraine is evidence of the weakness. There's also evidence of a weakness going back to Ukraine not being a part of NATO. Not being a part of NATO has a way of coming back to, work against you. If you thought you didn't have to be a part of this bloc that was created mainly to protect the world against Russia, and you didn't think you didn't need it, it's like, having a fire, not having fire insurance. I mean, so it exposes a lot of things there that on the part of Russia, these other allies that are forming together to help Russia because they need materials and weaponry to fight the war and sustain the war. And in my opinion, it just exposes how really weak they are at their core. So it's I think that the United States, if we're going to, we don't really have the same moral posture we used to. It's sad to say, but at least there's some attempt to kind of weigh in on the side of right and justice in this particular matter. So I just hope that what help we do provide could make a difference. That may be just what is needed. I know during World War II and so forth, that little bit of help, that Allied support made all the difference in the world in the outcome of that war. Hopefully this might be work out in a similar manner.
I'm wondering if some of that help will come in if China decides to step up its game in this triad in which they are a part, because they depend on where would we be without our made in China products, right? And that gets affected, and that flow of money stops or is stymied in some way. The player that concerns me the most is North Korea in this, that they would rise to the occasion to really saddle right beside Putin and try to broker some kind of deal for some power. And maybe that's being too out there, but just remembering past stories of North Korea's leadership and threats that they have said and the nuclear testing that they have done. That's a real concern that those two would be such chums right now.
Clay's own comments made me think about the will of people, because he spoke and something I have observed as well, other people would observe, is that Russia has really not been as successful as you would think against the Ukraine in their military efforts. And something I've heard on the news is that, or it seems that it's not so much the Russian army or fighters who really want to go there. They might be obedient and be part of that country with the information that they know. They may do that. But the Ukraine people, we know, want to defend their country. And so that will makes a big difference in the outcome of this war so far, I think. And that made me think about human will in other ways too. And that from the other powers, from North Korea, from Russia right now, what you hear is really the wills of two people. That's it. I mean, all you see on the news really from Russia is Vladimir Putin. That's really who you see. Every once in a while, there's a few other official bureaucrats, but not too much. North Korea, it's really Kim Jong-un, right? I think it's his name. You really only see him. You just see a minority of people. But on the other side, you see the Ukraine people You see people from Europe. You see
Good.
European leaders, as well as leadership and the people of the United States. Lots of people exerting their will in this effort. People willing in Europe, willing to make sacrifices. And we may even hear more news of sacrifices they make in terms of their energy costs and things like that. And I really think of this in some ways as a contest of wills. And I think of Russia's own injustice in this, how it was just so unjust for them to invade Ukraine like they did. And this war is just unjust. Yes.
I just wanted to add to the list, yes. There have been some incredibly heroic actions by some Russian dissidents, they would call them, but people who really are speaking out. Just pops into my mind the woman who was carrying that sign across the newsroom, "This is all lies and propaganda." To do that in that kind of a country, that's not to do that in America is not so heroic. To do that in Russia, and also I think that Vladimir Zelensky is an incredible hero. I mean, I'm right here. Here I am. I was just blown away by that. There's this great poem. I certainly don't know it all by heart, but there's one line in it that says, "A comedian walks into a country." And I love that because that's what he was originally. He was a professional comedian, but he has really risen in a very moral and just way of saying, we don't want to fight, we don't want to take lives, but we are not going to just lay down our independence. And I think there's a lot of heroes out there.
Well, that's one way you defeat a bully is you expose him for the joke he really is. So I think Mel Brooks, he took a shot at Hitler through comedy, right? Through humor. So the one of the most effective ways to break down a bully is to expose him for the joke he really is. And I think that the leader of Ukraine has taken that attitude and persona to expose the joke of Putin to the world and the joke of Russia to the world. See, all those, John, you mentioned all those other countries were led by one man, not by people. China, Ukraine, North Korea, they were led by one people. They don't reflect the will of the people. See, and the difference is in Ukraine, you have people that not only reflect their will, but many of them appeal to the will of God. They are praying people. They connect to God. You have the freedom of religion in a way that operates in Ukraine that does not operate in those other countries. So you not only have the will of the people, but the will of God that comes into play, and they're appealing to the will of God that gives them the will to stand up against this bully.
And a great way to end our program. Reverend Clay Calloway, thank you for your kind words. Thank you to Harriett Akins-Banman, Rabbi Emerita Gaylia Rooks, and Father John Stoltz for your time on this edition of Moral Side of the News. If you'd like to catch it again, just go to YouTube and search for Moral Side of the News. Thank you, panel. The conversations continue next week. Have a great week.